I am very excited to introduce our next speaker that we're going to be interviewing, TomO'Bryan. Many of you guys, might have heard of him. If you haven't, I don't know where you've been. If you might be under a rock at that point, because he is very well known. Thank you so much for being here today, Tom.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, today we're going to be talking about autoimmunity, autism, and leaky gut. And before we dive into that, can you give us a little bit of background of, where you came from, why you do what you do? I have your bio, but I always love it for when other people, can talk about their own life experience. I think it just kind of gives us a bigger picture.
Oh, sure. Let's see. Well, it was 37 years ago when I was in my internship, and my ex and I could not get pregnant, and I called the 7 most famous holistic doctors I'd ever heard of and asked them what they do in infertility, and they all told me what they do, and I put a program together, and we were pregnant in 6 weeks.
Wow.
My neighbors in married housing, we lived on campus, they asked if I'd work with them, and I said, well, I don't really know if it's going to help, but it certainly won't hurt you, sure. She was pregnant in 3 months, and she had been through artificial insemination, and nothing had worked. So I was still in my internship, and I was hot to trot to get out into practice and help every couple get pregnant that wanted to get pregnant. And that got me into functional medicine, and it was 1978 when I was struggling to figure out what was going on. And I went to a seminar by a guy named Dr. Jeffrey Bland. And it was his first seminar in Chicago in 1978. And Dr. Bland is the founder of the Institute for Functional Medicine, and so I've been following him ever since. His help and the people he suggested I talk to and others got me the information so that I could put a program together, and we achieved a successful pregnancy. And so I started treating people when we were still living in the dorm. I mean,
Wow.
Our friends would hear that we were pregnant. We were so happy we were talking about it, and she'd call her sister in Wisconsin who couldn't get pregnant, and they'd come down from Wisconsin, and I'd treat them, and they got pregnant, and it just started from there. And there's not much in medicine that's an all or every. This is an every. In my clinical experience, this is an every. Every single person that had hormone-related problems, every single person, whether it was infertility, recurrent miscarriages, low testosterone, high estrogen, low progesterone, whatever it was, every single person also had a sensitivity to foods that they were eating that was causing a problem and causing inflammation in their body. And the result was that this led me into the study of functional medicine in my entire career. And as you know, I've been on the faculty of the Institute for Functional Medicine now for many, many years, and my area of expertise is teaching about intestinal permeability, the slang term, the leaky gut. So what we've learned over the years is that it's a functional medicine approach that will always help you when you're dealing with any health condition that you're not satisfied with the results so far. So what is functional medicine? We like to think of this visual, I like to think of this visual, that by the time you've got symptoms, irrespective of what the symptoms are, by the time you've got symptoms, you've fallen over a waterfall and you've crashed in the pool below and you're just trying to stay afloat, and you're dealing with the symptoms, dealing with the symptoms, dealing with the symptoms. And what you have to do, of course you want to feel better, of course you want to get the symptoms under control, but you need to go back upstream. Before you fell over the waterfall and started developing symptoms, you have to go back upstream to say, what happened here? Why is this going on? What fell into the stream? What fell into the river that caused the problems? And that is the world of functional medicine. So when irrespective of what condition you're dealing with, unless it's an acute injury, like you fell down and broke a leg, anything else that develops over time, you're always going to find value in asking the question and learning, why is this happening? Not just what can I do to get the symptoms better, which is of critical concern, especially for your listening audience in autism. How can I help my son or daughter function better? Critically important, but you're going to get so much bang for your buck if you're also asking the question, why is this happening? Which is the primary reason why I think you'll agree with this. Every physician that I've ever known that deals with autism a great deal, every single one of them includes food selections as a component, get certain foods out of that child's diet to help that body function better. You're trying to figure out where's the inflammation coming from that's causing the problem, so you always want to include addressing foods. That means you're going upstream to look at what might be triggering some of this stuff. I've never heard of a study that says if you eat more blueberries, your autism goes away. So I don't know of a food that's going to reduce the incidence of autism. I know of many foods that will reduce the manifestations of autism if you get them out of your diet, but I don't know of any specifically, any single foods, that's going to chase the tail, meaning deal with the symptoms directly. But by identifying what fell in the stream up before the child fell over the waterfall into the symptom pool, what fell in the stream? What sensitivities are there that may have triggered some of this and also continues to fuel it?
Wouldn't it be nice if there was one food, though? It would be nice.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice? That would be marvelous. Yeah, like nectar from the gods or something from the elves.
Something. Oh my goodness! Right. I think we'd all be lined up to buy it. But
yes.
So as people are thinking of leaky gut, clearly people listening, some people may know what it is, and some people really don't. I mean, this isn't something that most of us grew up talking about for the most part. If we didn't have an issue with foods and we didn't have intolerances or we didn't have food allergies, we probably never even thought about our gut. It's one of those things. At least I never did growing up until I got older. But I never thought what I'm putting in my body has that direct effect on how I'm feeling. It was more like I'm hungry, I eat. And
right.
I think a lot of people, that's how we grew up. And so when all of a sudden you hear leaky gut, what does that mean? What is leaky gut?
You bet. That's a really good question, and I'll preface it by saying the lucky ones are the ones that eat something and they feel bad afterwards in their stomach. They're lucky because you can't argue with them. They eat pizza and they get bloated and feel terrible. You can't argue with that, right? The unlucky ones are the ones that don't feel bad when they eat a food and the food's causing problems. As an example, in my lectures, I often ask the question in the audience, there might be 400 doctors, and I'll say, how many of you know or suspect that you may have a sensitivity to gluten? Raise your hand, please. And they lift their hand. I say, raise them high. Come on. Lift them high. And look around the room. And it's always somewhere between 70 to 90% of the room raise their hand. If you're at a holistic conference, it's 90% of the room. If you're at a very traditional medical conference where people haven't studied much about this, it might be 20 or 30% of the room. But the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, the American Academy for the Advancement of Medicine, the Institute for Functional Medicine, acupuncture groups, naturopathic groups, chiropractic groups, 90% of the room raise their hand. I say, look around the room. Thank you. Put your hands down. Now, how many of you know or suspect if you have an inadvertent exposure to gluten, it seems to affect your brain? Raise your hand. And about 70% of the initial group that raise their hand again, meaning it doesn't affect their gut. It affects their brain. They get brain fog, they get brain fatigue, they get headaches, they get goofy thinking, they wake up in the morning, they don't wanna, they've got depression, they've got anxiety. And I say, look around the room. Do you think your practice is different than this room? And there's just silence because they've never thought about it like this before. I'm not lecturing to a group of celiacs here. This is a group of healthcare practitioners. You just saw how many of you suspect you have a sensitivity to wheat, and you just saw how many of you suspect that if you have an inadvertent exposure, it affects your brain? Why are we not looking for this condition in all brain dysfunction? And there's just silence, and people nod their heads, and, so I drive the point home. So that's to complete the last topic. Now, what is leaky gut? So in order to understand this, and I think every family needs to understand this in a general way. You don't need all the geeky science, but you need to understand it in a general way so you've got the picture. So I'm going to give you a visual. If you take a donut, and you could stretch a donut out, one big long donut, and you look down the hole of the donut, that one big long donut, that's your GI tract from your mouth to the other end. It's one big long tube, right? So if you look down the center of the donut, and when you swallow food, the food is in the donut. It's in the tube. It's not in your body yet. It's not in your bloodstream. It's in the tube. It's got to go through the walls of the tube to get into the bloodstream. I know, people haven't thought about this before, but as you think about it, just stay with me. It'll make a lot of sense to you. Proteins, and anytime you have an allergy, almost every time, there's a few exceptions, but almost every time, 9 out of 10 times, if you have an allergy, if you have a sensitivity, your immune system is fighting the protein in a food, whether it's wheat or fish or eggs or soy or peanuts or whatever it is, your body's fighting the protein in the food. That's why I'm going to use protein here as an example. There's only 3 categories of foods: proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. And the primary thing your immune system fights against is protein. Why? There's another discussion, and maybe your people will have questions and we'll answer the questions or something. But it's protein. So Mrs. Patient, think of proteins like a pearl necklace. Hydrochloric acid undoes the clasp of the pearl necklace. That's made in your stomach, hydrochloric acid. It undoes the clasp of the pearl necklace. Now you have a string of pearls. It's the enzymes produced by your pancreas, your gallbladder, the good bacteria in your gut. These enzymes act as scissors to cut the pearl necklace into smaller clumps of the pearl necklace. And it keeps cutting them smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until you have each pearl by itself. Those pearls are called amino acids. And your body absorbs the amino acids. The amino acids are small enough to go right through the walls of the intestine into the bloodstream. So now it's no longer in the donut. It's no longer in the tube. Now the amino acids, called the building blocks, go into the bloodstream and they travel through your whole body. And you make new bone cells out of amino acids. You make new brain cells. You make new heart hormones out of amino acids. You make new brain hormones called neurotransmitters out of amino acids. So they're the building blocks. You've got to have them. And a primary reason why your gut is 20 to 25 feet long and winds around inside your abdomen there is because some of these proteins are tough to break down into smaller clumps and smaller clumps. Prime rib takes a long time to break down compared to a banana. But you've got to break it down into each pearl of the pearl necklace so it can fit through the walls, the little holes in the walls of the donut, and get into the bloodstream. So you've got this donut, and the walls of the donut on the inside are covered in cheesecloth. Cheesecloth only allows amino acids to get through into the bloodstream. Just the tiniest little amino acids, bigger clumps of the pearl necklace, can't get through. Only amino acids, and maybe 2 amino acids put together. That's called a dipeptide. Everything else is too big. It can't get through. That's why you got 20 feet of intestines, because your enzymes are snipping, trying to make it smaller. It bumps up against the cheesecloth, but it's too big. It can't get in. Got to go further down the canal, further down the GI tract, being snipped smaller and smaller and smaller until it gets small enough, bumps up against the wall of the intestines. Now it goes right through into the bloodstream. That's how we absorb our protein and our fats and our carbohydrates, is that they've got to go through the walls of the intestine that's covered with cheesecloth. Beautiful system. The problem is when you get tears in the cheesecloth. You get tears in the cheesecloth, that's leaky gut. the technical name, the geek name, is pathogenic intestinal permeability, slang term leaky gut. When you get tears in the cheesecloth, now bigger clumps of the pearl necklace get through into the bloodstream before they should. They're too big. They can't get in. But wait, there's tears in the cheesecloth, and they get through there. And there's 33 pearl clumps, 17 pearl clumps, 19 pearl clumps, 27 pearl clumps. These big clumps of protein molecules are called macromolecules, big molecules. They get through into the bloodstream. And your immune system says, whoa, what's this? This is not good for me. I better fight this big clump of the pearl necklace, this macromolecule. And so your immune system makes antibodies to fight this clump of the pearl necklace. Now you're allergic to prime rib, or to bananas, or to beef, or to carrots, or to couscous, or to oats. And these are the people that do 90 food panels to see what you or your child is sensitive to. It comes back you're sensitive to 35 foods. You say, oh my God, that's everything I eat. Well, of course it is. Your immune system's trying to protect you. Your immune system hasn't gone crazy. It's trying to protect you because these macromolecules are not something your body can use to rebuild healthy new tissue. That's why it is so critically important to deal with intestinal permeability. Critically important. Because if you have this tear in the cheesecloth, you're making antibodies to all of these different protein clumps. And the antibodies cause inflammation in your body. And every degenerative disease, as far as I know, every degenerative disease, whether it's autism, depression, anxiety, rheumatoid arthritis, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, every disease is a disease of inflammation. At the cellular level, the cell is always inflamed. The brain is inflamed for autism. So the first rule of thumb, the very first rule of thumb in dealing with an inflammatory disease like autism, the very first rule of thumb, stop throwing gasoline on the fire. Critically important to do that. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means if you're sensitive to a food, you can't eat the food. Oh my God, that's all he eats. You figure it out. You figure out how to do a gut healing program, and you don't do it by yourself, of course. You get the right instruction, and there's tons of information out there. We have lots of information on our website. I've got nutritionists on staff that guide patients through this. I'm writing a book right now that's going to be week by week how to do this. But the first step is to understand the mechanism of what's going on upstream. You keep throwing gasoline on the fire, and Mrs. Patient, if you pull at a chain, the chain always breaks at the weakest link. It's at one end, the middle, the other end, your heart, your brain, your liver, your kidneys, wherever your genetic weak link is. So let's say it's your brain and your child has autism. That's the weak link in the chain. You have to stop pulling on the chain, which means stop throwing gasoline on the fire. It's a prerequisite to calming down the inflammatory cascade. That's why intestinal permeability is so critically important to identify. You identify it, you have to identify it correctly, and we'll talk about that, but you identify it, then you learn what protocols do I do to calm down these tears in the cheesecloth, and 3 months later you go back and you recheck. You must recheck. Oh, my son's doing better. You must recheck, because if it's 90% fixed and not 100% fixed, and you think it's okay to introduce some foods again, well, you're just going to throw gasoline back on the fire. So you always want to check and make sure that what you're doing is working. The other side of the coin is your son is not any better, but you still recheck in 3 months because you've been squeaky clean. Okay, good. The permeability is working. He's stable. He's not getting macromolecules. Where else is gasoline coming from? And then there might be things like heavy metals, lead or mercury, toxic environmental exposures like bad air. Well, hopefully we can talk about the air and how that is associated with autism. But there's more than one mechanism. I know it's overwhelming, but if you have a child with autism, you're going to dial this down. You're going to get familiar with this. So you must stop the leaky gut, because no matter what else you do, anything you eat will be gasoline on the fire when the macromolecules get through the tears in the cheesecloth. It doesn't matter how healthy the... So it's a foundational premise that you must address intestinal permeability. First, does my child have it? And second, what do I do to fix it? And then you apply the principles. And third, you check again 3 months later and see, all right, how's he doing? Oh, look, he's 80% better. He's not fixed yet completely, darn it, but he's 80% better. Good. Stay with the protocol. It's working. Or your doctor may say, we need to tweak this protocol a little bit. But you must understand to be using these biomarkers, these tests, for what they were designed for. They're not black and white. You've got it or you don't. So you've got it. Okay, I've got it. Now do the therapy. 6 months later, oh, he's doing better. I don't need to test again. Yes, you do. Because if you don't recheck to confirm you've addressed the permeability, then the likelihood is it's still there, and you will not get the results you want long term.
Now you're talking about the different tests. What about for a child with autism? Is it a blood test? Is it a stool test? How do they test for leaky gut?
That's a good question. There are a number of tests that have come out over the years. The initial test that was first done was a urine test, and you drink this kind of like sugar water stuff, and then you collect the urine over a period of time and see if the molecules got through a leaky gut, and they're now being filtered out in the urine. It turns out that test is okay, but it's not great. There's lots of mistakes with that test. But that's the test that they came up with over 30 years ago now, and it was to measure the effectiveness of treatments for Crohn's disease. That's specifically what it was designed for. So that's called the lactulose mannitol test. And there are some doctors that still use it, and it's a useful tool, but it's not comprehensive. 6 years ago, a laboratory called Cyrex Labs came out with a blood test that was the first test that really looked in more detail, more sensitive detail for markers of intestinal permeability. And they are antibodies to different tissues of the gut. And that test has been a very useful tool for the last 6 years. In the last year, a new laboratory came out with a new test that's much, much more comprehensive. And it's a blood test, and it looks not only at the markers of intestinal permeability that Cyrex Labs test looks at, but it also looks at many more markers of wheat sensitivity in the same blood draw in the same test. That test is called the Wheat Zoomer, Z-O-O-M-E-R. It's the most comprehensive test to date that I have seen, and it's given us more information than we've seen from any other test so far. And so you would want to go to your doctor and say Vibrant America Labs, or you even could go online, vibrant-americalabs.com, and download some information about this test. Take it to your doctor. He won't know about it, most likely, because it's a new lab, just came out about a year ago, and say, hi, can you get an account with this lab? There's no charge to the doctor to do it, and order this test for me. I want to do this test. And your doctor will say, oh, the lactulose mannitol is the test we've done for 20 years. Yes, I know, and it's a helpful tool, but this is the cutting-edge test that tells us much more. I'd like to do this test. Well, we do the lactulose mannitol. Don't tell me what to do. Okay, thanks, doctor. You don't fire your doctor because there's some value to that particular doctor, or else you wouldn't be going to him, but you find another doctor to bring onto your healthcare team. Unless you get so upset with this person that they're closed-minded, then do what you feel is right. But I'm not telling you to go out and find new doctors. I'm telling you to bring other people on the team that are more current. So you can read about this test on my website. My website is thedr.com, thedoctor.com. Just don't spell the word doctor out. And it's the Wheat Zoomer test. We're doing videos on this, and we talk about it a lot. I've trained hundreds of doctors on this test so far. It's the most comprehensive thing I've seen. It's really great. So that is the test to do. And if your doctor won't do it, and you can't find a doctor to do it, my team will do it for you. But I'm not asking you to come to us. It's really more of a nuisance than a benefit. But as a last resort, you can. The Wheat Zoomer from vibrant-america.com. That is the test to identify intestinal permeability, the most sensitive test to date that I've seen. Staying on this topic for one more minute, because very few parents know this. Very few doctors think about this. But when it comes back and it's positive for intestinal permeability, great, you found it. Great. And I'm going to take a step back for parents now for a minute and just kind of give you a sense of how to think about this test. You know, people come to me. The patients that come to me, I love them. They say, I've been to Mayo Clinic. They don't know what's wrong. And I say, that's great. That's just great. And they look at me like I'm a little weird because they've heard I'm weird anyway, but that's all right. I'm half Italian. I don't mind. But I say, look, if you had a disease, Mayo Clinic would find it. You don't have a disease. You've got dysfunction. So let's do the test to see what's not functioning right. And they kind of tilt their head and they look at me and say, well, that makes sense. So they come back for their second visit. We've done the blood draws. We've done the tests that we're going to do. And they come back for the test results in a couple, 3 weeks. And they sit down and they're nervous, like we all are with our own test results. And I look at them and I say, good news. You're a mess. There are so many things wrong. They look at me like, I say, this is good news because all this can be fixed. If it comes back and it says there's nothing wrong, I did something wrong here, So you want these tests to come back and identify exactly what's going on for you. You want to find out what's not functioning right. It's critical. So that's how you hold it when these, oh my God, my son's got intestinal permeability. No. You say, oh, great. We found something that's not working that I know can be fixed. Great. How do we fix it? That's the way you approach these tests, because it's just a sin that you've got a child that's suffering like that and can't really bring their talents to society that they have. And so many parents say, my son is so smart, but he just can't ... So you want to find the tests that are not working right. You want to find the tests that are saying, hey, this is throwing gasoline on the fire no matter what he eats all the time. And so be grateful when these tests come back and they identify a problem, because these things can be addressed. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, when a test comes back positive for intestinal permeability, you have to take a step back to get a big picture overview of that environment. What does that mean? When a patient comes in to see me, I often go through this routine with them. And we'll stand next to the table. I was classically trained as a chiropractor and a nutritionist. And we'd stand by the table, and I'd say, Mrs. Patient, in a moment, I'm going to ask you to take a step backward away from the table. I'm just going to touch your arm gently and say, let's take a step back, okay? And they say, okay. They're looking at me like I'm weird as can be, and they're standing there, and I'm standing next to them. And I say, so let's imagine for a minute, here is your body on the table. So imagine you're laying on the table with your diabetes or with your rheumatoid or with your son's autism. Just imagine that they're on the table. And what we have to do is, and then I touch their arm and say, okay, take a step back. We have to step back and take a look at the big picture of what's going on in this body. You can't be stuck in the whirlpool with the symptoms. You've got to take a step back to get a big picture. Of course you want to address the symptoms. Of course you want to address the autism. Of course you want to address the rheumatoid or the MS or whatever it is. But you have to take a step back to get the big picture overview of where's it coming from. So when you identify intestinal permeability, you can't just say, okay, let's fix it. How do we fix it? You've got to take a step back and say, what's going on in that environment that's causing the intestinal permeability? Where is it coming from? And what most doctors, the papers just started coming out on this 3 or 4 years ago, so many doctors are not yet comfortable or familiar with this, and that is the area of the intestines. It's called the microbiome. The good bacteria that's supposed to be in your gut and the bad bacteria that's there that's not supposed to be there. When you've got intestinal permeability, you always have dysbiosis. That means an imbalance of the bacteria in your gut. Always. So part of the protocol to treat intestinal permeability, pathogenic intestinal permeability, leaky gut, is also to evaluate the gut microbiome and address the gut microbiome. must do that, or all of your efforts to heal the damaged gut, the tears in the cheesecloth, are going to be thwarted. It's going to be like backing out of the driveway in your car, but the emergency brake's on. So the car's in reverse, and you're pushing on the gas. You're going back and say, whoa, what's wrong with this car? It's not going the way it usually... Oh, wait, the emergency brake's on. And you let go of the emergency brake, and then the car goes backwards really easily. That's what's going to happen to you trying to treat intestinal permeability if you also do not address the microbiome. You have to take a step back and not be stuck with, oh, I've got leaky gut, I have to fix this leaky gut. Part of fixing the leaky gut is addressing the microbiome. I want to make sure to get that to you today because I don't think that's in any of the questions that you had sent me over. So that's a really important component.
And when you're addressing that, is a probiotic something that we would be using with that, along with the proper foods and removing the culprits, that are causing the inflammation?
Well, that's a really good point. And for those who don't know, what that question means is buying some nutrition of the good bacteria. They're called probiotics, and that's an important component. However, we now know, and there's literally thousands of studies on this now, it's the primary emphasis in healthcare. If you look at what topics are the hottest topics, and there's two right now, the microbiome and its impact and regenerating the brain. And that's what my next book's about, because they are so hot. I mean, there's studies coming out every single day on this stuff. Teams of researchers that study for 6 months, 8 months, and then they write their paper every single day. Or that's an exaggeration. Maybe 3 times a week there's a new paper coming out of another team that's been studying some aspect of how do you rebuild or regenerate brain function. I mean, it's just the hottest topic along with the microbiome. So the probiotics, buying the supplements of probiotics is an important component, but we now know very clearly it is not the big kahuna protocol, that it's insufficient to get the job done. Why? Because it's the diversity of the bacteria in your gut that's so important. You've got to have a whole lot of the good guys, but there's a whole lot of good guys. There's different types of good guys. There's thousands of different species of bacteria. So if you take a probiotic of 3 species, but there's thousands that are supposed to be there, how effective are we going to be? It certainly is going to help, and there are many, many studies showing the benefit of taking Lactobacillus acidophilus or Bifidobacterium. There's many studies that show the benefit of doing that, but it's incomplete. So you want to take your probiotics, and your doctors will recommend probiotics to you, or your research, you'll find good probiotics. And if you aren't sure where to go and what to look for, you go to my site, or if you want a shotgun one that works really well, it's called VSL number 3. VSL number 3 is a good one, but that's only a component of rebuilding a healthy microbiome. You have to get rid of the bad bacteria that's in there, so you have to figure out what's the bad bacteria, so you have to do the test for that, and then you have to replace with the good bacteria, and you have to give the food to feed the good bacteria so it can grow, it can multiply. So that means prebiotic and probiotic foods. So as an example of probiotic foods, not just vitamins, but probiotic foods, now don't get caught by, oh, my son won't eat that. Don't go there. That's being stuck in the whirlpool. Right now, just get the big picture. So what we recommend to all of our patients is you go to Whole Foods or another natural food store and buy 5 different types of fermented vegetables, 5 different types. And maybe you get sauerkraut, and you get kimchi, and you get pickled or beets, and you get curry-flavored pickled vegetables, and you get Italian-flavored pickled vegetables. Each one of these contains different vegetables, and the fermenting of those vegetables encourages the growth of different types of good bacteria. And I tell all my patients, you have 1 forkful a day. Walk by the refrigerator with a fork and have 1 forkful a day of your fermented vegetables and vary it all the time. So you're inoculating your gut with hundreds and hundreds of different species of good bacteria every day. And some people say, well, why do you only tell them to give 1 forkful? Because I'm really happy if you get 1 forkful. 2 forkfuls are better. But if you get 1, well, my son won't eat it. Well, then we have to strategize. Well, how do you strategize? You take a spoonful of the juice and you put it in the mashed potatoes. They'll never taste it, but it's still there. Don't cook the mashed potato. Don't cook it in the mashed potatoes. After you've cooked the mashed potatoes, you put a teaspoon of the sauerkraut juice in with the mashed potatoes, and so they get a little
juice.
bit. Next week,
you're not even asking for the vegetable. You're just asking for the juice.
Exactly. And next week you do 2 teaspoons, and the week after that you put a couple threads of the sauerkraut or whatever other vegetable it is and you gradually build up the taste tolerance to it. I mean, it's a great, great concept. Not pickled, because pickled is just vinegar. You want fermented. But that's, you'll figure out how to do it. So don't get caught by, oh my God, he won't eat it, I can't do that. Get away from being stuck in the pool at the bottom of the waterfall. I know it's hard to do, and I know you're saying that's easy for him to say, but you have to step back and get a big picture and strategize. That's what these support groups are for. That's what these summits are for, is that you hear so many other great ideas of what's worked for other people. But if you don't step back and say, boy, I really need to figure out how to get fermented vegetables into it, it may be 3 months from now when you're going to read an article on getting fermented vegetables in kids. And you might just breeze right past it because you say, oh, no, my son won't eat it. But I say, oh, wait a minute. Maybe they've got an idea in there that'll work for me. So that's the value of taking a step back, is not screening, is this going to work for me today? Is my child going to do this? Am I going to do this? Don't do that. You've got to go upstream to figure out what triggered all of this stuff, and then you can start working with the experts, if you can't do it on your own, with the experts on how am I going to address this.
I usually tell people, I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't tell you the future, but the only thing I can say with a lot of certainty is if you stand in that spot and you don't move for a year, and when I come back a year from now and you're still standing in that spot, you have not moved forward. So, if you don't try, you don't take that step, and you don't say, okay, maybe my kid will try it. I talk to so many families throughout the year that will say, my child will never do this diet. My child will never try this supplement. My child will never. And I say, you're right. You know why they're never going to do it? Because you're never going to do it. Like if you constantly say they're never going to do it, they're never going to. And, my son has autism, and we've gone through the gamut trying to do different things. And, a lot of the ideas you talked about, you try this. Okay, maybe that doesn't work. Okay, maybe you try this. And it's a lot in baby steps. And I think with a lot of families, the mistake they make, and I've done this, and I still do this from time to time, and, before I go, oh, yeah, I can't do it that way, is you want fast results. You want them to hurry up and take the full forkful of, fermented stuff.
Exactly.
And you have to realize, like, if I just take little baby, maybe it takes me 30 days, but in 30 days, maybe he'll take the whole fork. Maybe it takes me 60 days, but I'm going to get there closer by taking these baby steps than just trying to shove the whole fork down his throat.
I never thought I'd say this, but I'm going to say this. I'm 65 right now. And I just got married in October. My lovely wife is 37, and we are going to have a family. And I just read an article yesterday that men over 50 are 2.5 times more likely to produce autistic children. I just read that yesterday, and I thought, oh, geez. There is no way I am not going to have a family with this woman. She's sitting here smiling at me right now. There's no way that is not going to happen. And if we have an autistic child, that's the deck of cards that we were dealt in life, and we will deal with it, right? So for you parents, I'm sorry, but that's the deck of cards that you got, and you aren't going to find a pill that's going to fix this. So there has to be a shift in the way that you look at this if you want to be successful. As you've just said, if you're standing in the same spot a year from now, something's wrong. That it's going to be trial and error. And my job is to make the trials successful as much as possible for you guys, but you're going to fall on your face sometimes. He's not going to eat it. He's not going to do this, right? But that's the deck of cards that you've got for whatever reason. That's what the Creator put together for you. And I don't know if you're religious or not, but, that's what you got. And you can't walk away from it. And so, deal with it. And what that means, I'm sorry to be so blunt, but somebody's got to tell you, is that child's dependent on you to find a way to get him able to function in the world. They're dependent on you. And it's a pain in the ass, excuse me. I know it is. I mean, it's more than that. It changes your life. It completely changes your life. I've had many autistic patients. I know what goes on for these parents. I know what it means to the relationships. I know. And there's no way out of it. This is what you got. And you can suffer and resist, or you can say, you know what? All right, let's just try this one. And you fall on your face, get up, and move forward with the next one. Let's try this. Get up, move forward with the next one. Let's try this. It's the only way you're going to get through this, and hopefully you find a doctor and a coach, or you listen to summits like this, and you learn things so that you don't fall very often. And you're up and walking forward more often than you're falling.
Absolutely, and at least when you're getting pregnant, it sounds like in the near future here for you guys, you know all the things to do to try to keep as healthy as you possibly can and keep her as healthy as you possibly can. Do you have any advice for those that are trying to get pregnant? To try to keep their bodies healthy?
Oh, yes. Yes. This is going to rock your boat. Studies are very clear now, and depending on the study for the percentage, but the first one I read that really caught me is that women with antibodies to their own brain tissue, 86% of the offspring of these women are on the autism spectrum. When you have an autoimmune mechanism going on in your own body, whether or not you know it, if you are making antibodies to your own brain tissue, there are only 2 times in the life of a person's brain where antibodies can get into the brain. There's only 2 situations because the brain has its own cheesecloth that's much more restrictive than the cheesecloth in the intestines. It's called the blood-brain barrier. It doesn't let anything in that's too big and shouldn't be there. And your brain has its own immune system. The body has 4 different immune systems. The one in the brain is called the glial cells, G-L-I-A-L. That's a really good Scrabble word, glial, G-L-I-A-L. And when you activate the glial cells because something got in through the blood-brain barrier that's not supposed to be there, you got a problem. You've got inflammation in the brain. And autistic kids' brains are inflamed. So there's only 2 times that antibodies can get into the brain because antibodies are really big molecules. They're macromolecules. They can't get in through the blood-brain barrier. So what are the 2 times? In utero, because mom's IgG antibodies are traveling through the whole body of baby in utero, saying, okay, baby, here's some antibodies to cats. We've got cats at home. They're nice cats. No need to freak out. Or here's some antibodies to mold because we live in the woods and the leaves fall outside and the leaves decay, so there's mold in the air. So here's a few antibodies to mold. So mom's IgG antibodies are traveling through baby's body in utero and in the brain. They get into the brain also. So if mom has antibodies to her own brain tissue, an autoimmune mechanism to her own brain tissue, there is a high risk of those antibodies getting into baby's brain in utero. Now you have an immune reaction attacking that baby's brain in utero. That baby's brain is compromised in how well it develops. Now you've got a real problem. So any family that has autism in the family now, children with autism, if you're going to have more kids, if that's a choice that the 2 of you have decided to do, both mom and dad need to be checked to see, do I have antibodies to my brain? And most doctors will have no clue of what you're talking about. Absolutely no clue. They'll think you're nuts. That's why, and I didn't think I was going to say this, but I will, you need to read my book that came out last September, The Autoimmune Fix, because I talk about, the whole book is about autoimmunity, when your body makes antibodies, why it makes antibodies, how do you stop the body from making antibodies. Because if now remember I said about the doctors in my lectures, how many of them have brain symptoms? Practically every one of them, if you check them, they all have elevated antibodies to their brain. That's why they get brain symptoms. And it's the weak link in their chain. You pull in the chain, it breaks the weakest link. If wheat is the gasoline on the fire for them, and their symptoms are brain-related, they've got antibodies to their brain. That's how common it is. It's very, very common. So anyone that has a family history of brain diseases, autism, depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, if you're thinking of having kids, you just need to check. Do I have antibodies currently, elevated levels of antibodies to my own brain? Really important. Why is it that the incidence of autism is on such a rise? There are many, many reasons, but this is another reason. Because the incidence of autoimmunity is dramatically on the rise in the last 30 years, that goes hand in hand with all of the toxic chemicals in the environment that we're exposed to and our immune system trying to protect us. So the book is called The Autoimmune Fix. If you go to my website, thedr.com, if you click on the book there, it sends you to Amazon to get it, but you also can download a bunch of handouts that help give you more information on the topic of autoimmunity. So yes, if you're thinking about having children, that is a critical component. That's a prerequisite that we now know. There are many studies on this. My gosh, I'm sitting here on my computer and I'm looking at, I was just reading some studies before because I'm writing the book now. Here's a study, autism, maternally derived antibodies specific for fetal brain protein. So maternally derived antibodies specific for fetal brain proteins. The next one, maternal autoantibodies in autism. The next one. What's the next one here? Where is it? Come here, you. Come here. Get out of my way. Let's see. Maternal anti-fetal brain IgG autoantibodies in autism spectrum disorders. Current knowledge and its implications for potential therapeutics. I mean, there are many studies on this now. And I don't know that any doctor has ever talked about this before in an autism summit or on stage. And so it's cutting-edge information. The researchers are just coming out and saying, well, there seems to be an association here. Depending on the study, 86% of the children of women that have antibodies to their brain, their children are autistic. You know, they're going back and looking at autistic kids and looking at the moms, and 86% of the moms had elevated antibodies to brain tissue. And some other studies is 54%. You know, the numbers will vary, but this mechanism is being identified as a contributor in the development of autism spectrum disorders. So it's not the cause of it, but it's a contributor to it. It may be a primary contributor for some people. So absolutely you need to check this. The next thing that you need to check, I'm going to talk about a different condition right now, but the same applies to autism, and that is we now know that there are at least 5 different types of Alzheimer's. Why do I say that? Because Dr. Dale Bredesen at UCLA runs the Buck Institute at UCLA, that's the Alzheimer's Research Center. He published the paper in 2014 completely reversing Alzheimer's in 9 out of 10 patients, card-carrying Alzheimer's patients. Completely reversing it, 9 out of 10 people. It took 5 years, but completely reversing it.
Was it catching it early?
No, it's not catching it early. These were mild, moderate, and severe Alzheimer's.
Wow.
The one that didn't respond was the severe one, the extremely severe one, just too far gone. And just a few weeks ago, he had his first weekend conference for doctors, and now he has over 100 patients that he's completely reversed it.
Wow.
It takes 5 years. But there's 37 things on the checklist. Do they have this? Do they have this? Do they have antibodies? Do they have gluten sensitivity? Do they have this? You have to fix all this stuff. That's just the way it is with autism. There's no one pill that's ever going to fix this. It's a functional disorder. There are many things, by the time the disorder has occurred, there are many things that are throwing gasoline on the fire. There's intestinal permeability, there's dysbiosis, there's bad bacteria in the gut, there may be heavy metal accumulation, there may be toxic chemical accumulation. But this next one that you have to look at is the air, because the type 3 of Alzheimer's is inhalation Alzheimer's. That what you inhale is the gasoline on the fire causing the brain inflammation and the brain deterioration that eventually manifests at Alzheimer's. Now they know every child they check in Mexico City, every child has evidence of early Alzheimer's. Every child. Because they first found this out in dogs. They checked dogs, and it was they did autopsies. Mortician, whatever it is. But they did autopsies on these dogs. Every dog. And then they found there was urine and blood tests they could do, and they found every child is showing the evidence of this now. Every child. It's because the air is so toxic. You breathe the air in, it goes right into your lungs, goes right through the lungs into the bloodstream, straight up to the brain, fire on the brain. Fire on the brain. And because many of these chemicals we're inhaling will cause damage to the blood-brain barrier. Now you got a leaky brain. We talk about the leaky gut. Now you got a leaky brain. So depending on where you live, the amount of inhalation that you may have going on, the amount of toxic crud in the air may be critically important. So what do you do if you know you've got air pollution in your city where you live? You get an air filter, the very best air filter that you can afford in your bedroom, because that's where you spend a quarter to a third of your life, is in the bedroom. You want the purest air. If you can afford to get one for the whole house, do it for the whole house. If you have an autistic kid, put one in his room, because you want the purest air possible. Well, the indoor environments aren't bad for you. Oh, really? The press board that makes up your kitchen cabinets is soaked in formaldehyde. The dining room table has got varnish on it, full of persistent organic pollutants. The deck outside, if the wood was made before 1986, is soaked in CCA. CCA is 50% arsenic, and it outgasses. So every time you sit on your deck, you breathe arsenic. We're exposed to all these toxic chemicals every single day. I mean, there's a world of stuff to learn. I start to talk about it in the Autoimmune Fix, in the book, The Autoimmune Fix. How do you stop throwing gasoline on the fire that's igniting your immune system? So, if you are going to have children and you are currently in a family with autism spectrum disorder, there's a checklist. You just want to do this checklist. How do you get the checklist? Read the Autoimmune Fix so that you get this big picture understanding. And then you go, oh my God, this is overwhelming. No, it's not. It's not overwhelming. It's a lot, but it's not overwhelming. And
autism is overwhelming.
For example,
I feel like autism is overwhelming. The checklist sounds way less than what autism can be for some families.
Exactly. Why do you take your shoes off at the door? It's not some Zen Buddhist thing to meditate. You take your shoes off at the door because Dad walked home from work, or Dad walked on the sidewalks on his way home from work, and the neighbors sprayed Roundup on the sidewalk to kill the dandelions yesterday. Dad's now got Roundup on the bottom of his shoes. That's the GMO chemical glyphosate. It's on the bottom of the shoes. Dad walks through the house with his shoes on. Now glyphosate's on the carpet. Little Kathy is sitting on the floor watching television. Kathy has autism. But now she gets glyphosate on her hands. She picks up a piece of cookie to eat a cookie. Now she's got glyphosate in her mouth. She's being exposed to glyphosate. Glyphosate kills the good bacteria in your gut. Now you got dysbiosis that's worse than ever. Dysbiosis causes intestinal permeability. Now you've got leaky gut with macromolecules going to the bloodstream from anything that little Kathy eats. And now she's throwing more fuel on the fire. That's why you leave your shoes at the door. Why do you not use saran wrap or put the plastic lid on the cup, on the coffee cup at the coffee shop? Because the plastic lid is loaded with bisphenol A. Bisphenol A, the heat from the liquid you're drinking, the steam goes up to the underside of the lid. It condenses, drips back down into the coffee. Now it's loaded with bisphenol A. and you lift the cup up to your lips. Now all the liquid's hitting the underside of the lid, and it's funneling down into the opening that's going into your mouth full of bisphenol A. Bisphenol A binds onto your estrogen receptor sites in your brain and other areas of your body. Now your immune system makes antibodies to the receptor sites for estrogen on your brain because there's bisphenol A sitting there. Now you got inflammation in your brain from drinking tea or coffee. Now you make antibodies to brain tissue because of bisphenol A. Now you get pregnant, and the antibodies to your brain tissue affect baby's brain development. That's why you don't use saran wrap and Tupperware and the lids on coffee cups. There's all this stuff to learn, people, and we don't have time to fool around anymore. You don't have time. The World Wildlife Fund published a study a few months ago with two major universities showing for the first time since 1970, there has been on average a 57% loss of all wildlife on the planet in the last 47 years. 57% loss of everything. Woodpeckers, rainbow trout, bumblebees, red robins, polar bears, cheetahs. 57% of everything has been killed off in the last 47 years. It's gone. We're next. The rise in autism is contributed to by the same cause as the loss of wildlife. The toxic, that 57% average, it's worse for species that live near fresh water. Why is that? They're drinking the water. If you were drinking the water coming out of the streams, you'd get cancer earlier. You'd get brain deterioration earlier. You'd be unable to reproduce earlier, just like the animals. We have to wake up. You have to wake up in how you live your life in this world today. So excuse me for being so blunt, but I don't know who's going to tell you this stuff. We have to wake up. We are poisoned by this world, and that's a critically important component of what's happening in the world of autism-related disorders.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I always talk about it. I wish I could sugarcoat it, but I can't. It's like I got to tell you what you have to hear, not what you want to hear, and that's right. And that's exactly what you're doing. Now, we talked a little bit about, how the parent can help the child's gut by doing these tests and changing the food. Can the gut, though, fully be repaired? And if so, how long does that take? And then lastly, do you have to be on this diet for your whole life in order to keep those results?
Yes, absolutely. The gut can be repaired. That's why you do pre and post tests. How long will it take? Anywhere from, depending on the individual, with an autistic kid, most likely at least a year or more, because they're going to be resistant to a lot of this. So you have to figure out how to get this stuff in them. My wife is a nutritionist and specializes in autistic kids. Her site is candonutrition.com, CANDO nutrition.com. You can learn more there, too. So it's going to take 3 months to a year of focused attention, and you recheck to confirm it's done. And do you have to stay on these restrictive diets for the rest of your life? Well, I'd like to phrase that question another way. Will it be okay to throw gasoline on the fire again? And the answer is most likely no, it will not, because their systems are going to be highly sensitive to igniting the fire. So most likely, most of these changes are permanent. And if that's the price you pay to have a child that's now functioning well on their own in their teenage years or in their 20s, they now live on their own, they're in college, they do incredible, they get straight A's in school, they're just brilliant kids. They may not have a lot of friends because they're not that social, but they've got a couple, and they're happy, and they're focused in what they're doing in their life. These are the kids we need out there. We used to call them blue babies because they were so unusual. They're brilliant. They're just brilliant. And they've got huge contributions to make. Einstein said this, and it's so true today. The problems we've created today cannot be solved with the same level of thinking that created the problems. We need these kids. Yeah. We need these kids with their brains that are functioning in a different way. We need them functioning and able to live on their own, being self-sufficient, and allowing their brains to explore how the heck are we going to turn around what these crazy adults have done to this world. Because we aren't doing it very well. So, Yes.
Now,
yes, it can be reversed. Yes,
does it matter the age that they're starting? So, because you mentioned they're, in their 20s, what happens if someone's listening right now and their child's 15 or 22, or can the damage still be repaired, and to help those kiddos at any age, or do they only have to be 2?
That's really no. It's a really good question. The human body always wants to be healthier. You may have heard we have an entire new body every 7 years. Every cell in your body regenerates. Every single cell. We used to think the brain cells didn't. They do. Every cell regenerates. The question is, do you regenerate a healthier cell or a sicker cell? So the healthier the environment you create, the healthier the cell that regenerates. And that's why people, you change your, let's say not an autistic kid, but let's just say someone in general, they're going to change their diet, they're getting off of the bad foods, they're taking some vitamins, they start exercising. 6 months later, someone they haven't seen in 6 months say, oh, what? Oh my God, what happened to you? You look fabulous. What happened to you? You look 15 years younger. And they do, because their body is younger than it was 6 months ago. You regenerate, and the fastest growing cells in the body are the inside lining of the gut. Every 3 to 7 days, you have a whole new lining to the gut. Stop throwing gasoline on the fire down there, and you will build healthier cells that eventually will start functioning more normally.
Now, I feel like we went through a lot. I can't believe our hour is up. And, I just feel like people, you guys need to go get his book. When is your new book out? You talked about you're writing a new book right now. When does that launch?
Yes. The new book will probably launch in the fall if we're lucky. At the rate that I go, because I keep reading new studies and then I change something because there's new studies. My last book was my first, and it's 35 years of my professional life, and it took 35 years to write it.
So we're hoping by this fall.
We're about right. Yeah, so I'm hoping by fall now to get this one done.
And people can find you on the doctor, which is the THEDR.com, so we can keep up with you there, and I'm sure you'll have announcements when your book is out. And then what was your wife's website again?
Can Do Nutrition, CANDO Nutrition.com. Is there a dash in between? I'm sorry, it's CAN-DO Nutrition.com. She's sitting here smiling, but she didn't tell me the dash needs to be in there. Can-Do Nutrition.com.
So you guys have those 2 websites now.
Yes.
Go ahead. Yeah,
I'll just say one more thing about that.
Yeah.
You'll see testimonials there of parents who have started this program with their kids, and they talk about how their kids are 20% better or 30% better, or whatever, and the parents are just so grateful because now their child is, there was one child, I just saw this video, it just caught my heart, 3.5-year-old, is that right, 3.5? 3.5-year-old boy who looked to be like a 1.5 years old, wasn't growing, wasn't developing, didn't move, didn't crawl. It was after a vaccination this happened, and mom has 2 other kids, I think, and doesn't have any time, doesn't have the money to buy nutrition or anything. She just did a couple of things. She got dairy out of that child's life. Was there anything else? Just got dairy out. And 3 months later, the mom sends Marzi the video, and the child is crawling. He's sitting up on his butt, and mom's hands are held out. Say, come here, baby, come here. And he's hopping on his butt to come to mom. He's got to look like, oh yeah. And she brings her hand out to the side, and he reaches with his hand. He wasn't following before. He wasn't following. His eyes weren't following. He wasn't doing anything. And now he's hopping on his butt because he doesn't know how to crawl. He didn't learn how to crawl yet. So there's a whole bunch of neurological training that's got to happen. But this is a baby step for a child that was just immobile, laying there, now is sitting up and hopping on his butt, responding to mom's call to come here. Those little baby steps, you just get tears in your eyes when you see this, knowing where that child was 3, 4, 6 months ago. So to all the parents out there, I say this all the time with every health condition. Stop going for home runs. Base hits win the ball game. Keep going for base hits. Just use a teaspoon of the fermented juice in his mashed potatoes, if that's the only way you can get it in. Base hits. Keep going for base hits. You will win the ball game.
Because it's not a sprint, it's definitely a marathon, is how I always think of it with my son. And you guys, people like you and your wife out there trying to help, and some of the other specialists that are really just putting their whole heart and soul into this. We can't do it without you guys. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for taking the time. I know what a busy person you are. I know you just got back from your honeymoon, so you're probably in still honeymoon phase, and here you are taking the time to help us and to help our community. So thank you so much, Dr. O'Bryan, for taking the time.
Oh, thank you. It's really a pleasure to be with you, and I wish all of you Godspeed in your journey.
And thank you all for listening.